Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody here. We're just waiting, we're having more attendees log in, so let's just allow them to be here. And there are already people with questions, and I see people raising hands. Just for now, kindly type in your queries or questions if you have problem logging in. I see hands by Shire. If you have any questions, just please put in the chat box. So I would love to open this fourth series, the session, with Dr. Sylvia Michel, who's joining us from Jamaica. And the talk is going to be about ethnobiotechnology, also how to safeguard our traditional habits the way along. So it's a way to look backward and forward at the same time. Dr. Sylvia Michel is very much associated with the Future Earth community. She's also one of our country leads in the low and middle income groups. That's Dr. Sylvia Michel. About Dr. Sylvia, she was born in West Africa, has a European ancestry with her connections in London, I think I'm correct, and has lived in Jamaica since she was 9 years old, and she's traveled many countries, more than 35 countries, with many publications related especially to tropical biodiversity. And she uses her training to tailor biotechnology advances for indigenous and local communities by combining both old and new knowledge, something very much needed at this age and time, converting those into climate smart solutions. And Dr. Michelle utilizes and tailors botany. She has a background in geography and biotechnology methods and helps rural communities who benefit from local biodiversity and cultural knowledge from the health and wealth. Dr. Michel's work is mostly uh, concentrated in the Caribbean islands and impacts mainly the Caribbean people in the area of ethnobioprospecting, which she's going to explain to us. Access to clean planting material, ancestral school gardens, value-added products from local products. She's part of the Caribbean ABS Steering Committee and has assisted the Caribbean nations to ratify the Nagoya Protocol of the CBD. Besides that, areas of expertise includes developing clonal and biofarming plant tissue culture protocols, bioactivity screening, biochemical analysis, and she also assists with standard development and is associated a lot with the bamboo industry in that region, and also associated with biotechnology solutions to ensure compatibility with climate justice and sustainable development. So that is Michelle for us. If you could pull off the slide, that would help us all. And Dr. Michelle has also been closely associated with various other initiatives in Future Earth community. And I hope the Science Awareness 4th series will also be a learning curve for many of our young researchers. Also, the remote areas, which will be these series are going to be broadcasted and also played back in various other series for especially targeting schools and colleges in the remote regions of India. With that, I welcome Dr. Sylvia, a very odd time for me. I'm very grateful that she can join us at 5 a.m. from a Jamaican time. Just to let all the audience give a little to give structure of the session today. We also have with us Dr. Rohini Mattu, who's an agriculturist, a soil scientist working at the Divecha Center, where there will be an interactive session after Dr. Sylvia speaks. And I would like to also thank all our technical staff and support, Harshita, Rian, and Adish, just to take this forward and help with any other technical issues that could be faced along the way. So with this, Dr. Sylvia, the room is yours, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you and getting me up so early at 5 a.m. So I wish to share with you what we have been up to in the Caribbean at the University of the West Indies, which is the major university in the Caribbean. and I run a medicinal plant research group, which I started in 1999. So quite a lot that I have to share. So I'm going to be touching on some things that I will not be able to get into detail. Hopefully we will continue the talk after this with a good introduction. Now I'm a teacher and I like to ask questions. So I would like you to quickly, 5 people in the chat, tell me what you think is biotechnology. When you hear the term biotechnology, what is your understanding? And this is, you can, both the panelists and those that are joining otherwise, that are helping out. Anybody? Quickly, 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 quickly. Teachers don't like to be kept waiting. So let's put in the chat what you understand by the term biotechnology when you hear it. No? Nobody can actually, do we have the capacity that persons can write in the chat? What is biotechnology? Use of plants in culture. Good. Anybody else? 5 people. I know we don't have that many people here, so maybe I'll put it to 3. But quickly, when you hear biotechnology, what is it that you understand by that term? This is very important because I find that there's a lot of misunderstanding about this term, right? Another one is gene transfer. Thank you, Che. Well, I need some, at least one person is responding. Thank you very much. Even in those 2 words, you see the variation of what is biotechnology. So the first thing I'm going to do is go and continue chatting, because as I get to the next slide, you're going to want to add a lot of things. But it comes from the 2 terms. One is any technology that can impact human, animal, or other biotech. Okay, but then you put the emphasis on technology and the impact on biology. But it's technology that has a bio component. Okay, so it's techniques that allow for the production of something with the aid of living organisms. And it's a commercial activity. Why? Because it's a technique. For example, the early biotechnologies would be, for example, making bread, in which you've added a living component, yeast. If you don't add yeast, then there is no biotechnology of making bread. Okay, the flour would just be flat and it wouldn't rise. So that is the ancient biotechnology, wine as well. Then there's classical biotechnology, and the modern one is after the discovery of DNA. Then you have technologies now not with the whole organism, but with the DNA from the organism. It is multidisciplinary, so it's much wider than tissue culture. It's basically, the techniques are tools, and you can use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the tools, whichever one suits your purpose. It has been used in different areas. So you have white, red, green, blue. And the new category is that I don't know if I'm the first person using this term, but I started using it in 2014, and I'm not seeing it in the literature. Before that is ethnobiotechnology, which is less commercial but more communal use of biotechnology. And as you can see, it draws on the bio, the chemistry, and engineering. And right in the middle is where it all integrates into the biotechnology. The new inventions and procedures are protected by intellectual property rights, but those tend to be for individuals. So there is this variation between this knowledge that is gained through science, where the technology is owned by the inventor and attached to patents. It is also funded, the development of it at the beginning, if you go back to it, by those who were the colonizers that appropriated traditional knowledge. and use it to fuel the Industrial Revolution. There's lots of examples. One that came up recently, we discovered that iron, the discovery of iron, how to make it, was in Jamaica. Somebody came from one of the industrial countries, took the knowledge, patented it, and closed down the plant in Jamaica that was making the iron. They took the cocoa, the knowledge of how to make it, patented it, and made chocolate, and so on. So there's so many different examples of this. They also took the land for themselves and paid the slave owners at the end of slavery, while the enslaved were left to fend for themselves. And then you get the different biotechnologies coming out. Reading, genetic engineering, drugs. Indigenous knowledge, on the other hand, has mostly been in biodiversity-rich hotspots. It's communal knowledge, it's taking care of the plants. It predates the colonial period. It started as oral knowledge, but is being written down. And then you had all this problem with colonial period that you see here. But they tend to share seed between regions rather than breeding hybrids, organic farming, polyculture, many plants growing in one place, and more dependence on infusion decoctions and nutraceuticals, and tend to have a low carbon footprint. So I try to have a little comparison between the two, because there tends to be this idea that modern knowledge is good and indigenous knowledge is just there, but just somebody going and learning about indigenous knowledge doesn't make it modern knowledge. It still belongs to the people. So looking through how I have done my work, I've realized it's not biotechnology in the normal sense. And I've coined this term ethnobiotechnology, which basically you're designing it with communities for their benefit. And it is a simultaneous and judicious use of both this indigenous and modern knowledge to tailor the biotechnology being developed to be appropriate for basically the communal traditional knowledge, which is not covered under the patent law as it stands now. Why is it needed? Because the community is who is the custodians of the plants that are needed for local, national, and global medicine, and including local communities ensures that their values and attitudes are considered, and that access and benefit sharing does not disturb the dynamics of the environment or its inhabitants. So you heard a little of my history. So by the time I was 20, I'd already lived in two, and here where the terms get you. I'm going to call it so-called developing countries and two so-called developed countries. I've always wanted to feed, for as far as I can remember, probably 7, 8 years old, the contrast of going between Ghana and America. And I've looked for, with God's help, areas that I can train to do that. Started with just thinking about feeding the world, having a belly full of food, then realizing that they need to be healthy food, wellness like aromatherapy, so you can feel good as well as being healthy. And then the need for technology and a need to remember the history, the ancestors that went before us, the history of who we are, and then finally the climate and sustainable development. So over the years, it has been refined, but it's still the center point is to feed. Now, this is just a quick glimpse into my life. From my mother's side, can go all the way back. From my husband's side, not so far at all. So this is just a little glimpse into my family. And it's a glimpse into where I work. So the mission is to train biotechnologists and integrate biotechnology into the economy, said to be a priority. We've never had more than 3 academics. We have 4 research groups. So, and we've graduated like 40 or 50 undergrads since we started in 1989. My group, the aim, to harness the potential of our plants for health and wealth. So we use what we have available to us, not having the support that you think you should have, like even somebody to help you in the lab. We have depended a lot on volunteer students, high schoolers, undergrads, and farmers to help us accomplish what you will see as I go forward. Another introduction to the area. This is the Caribbean. We are mostly ocean with islands scattered right through. We are actually the 7th largest of the 25 designated biodiversity hotspots in the world. And using biotechnology in such a high biodiversity area needs a different approach than if you're doing it in an extensive area with only a few plants available. We have over 25 main islands and mainland countries. So these are considered part of the Caribbean as well, Mexico, Guyana, and so on that go around. Even Florida is a little chips of it is in the Caribbean. So you can see here how much endemic plants we have. And just to give you an idea of one thing that gets me and has to be sorted out, the Caribbean area kind of disappears into any map that is shown. So you have Asia, Europe, Africa, Oceania, North and South America. So Oceania covers the East Islands, but these West Islands, the Caribbean between North and South America, keeps getting left out. And you can see they're really just tiny dots on a map. And I had to even blow it up to show those tiny dots. So we kind of disappear, which is why I have to introducing it now. But then the other problem we have is that all these terms that have come up, and all these terms on a first world developed center, global north, these are terms from the north, from those countries. And basically, they're the industrialized countries that colonized the tropics, all right? And it took away the land, took away the knowledge of how to use the plants, which is why the term biopiracy came up. And they tend to be biodiversity poor, while the Caribbean is biodiversity rich. And another term that is used is small island developing states. This is a poster that I did last year for Future Earth to show that this is the biodiversity hotspots in red. And then it goes through all different stages to the market. The Nagoya Protocol protecting or trying to protect the one that leads to drug production, but there's other parts of from the biodiversity to the market that are not covered. And the whole point is that if everything keeps getting extracted from the hotspots and is not returned, then the hotspots have a problem with maintaining the biodiversity from which the whole value chain starts from. So we really need to turn the value chains into value rings, which is part of what I've been trying to do. And as you see, this brings in the botany, it also brings in geography, because geography gives you a system approach, which is what this is showing you. We also refute the concept global north and global south, because this concept doesn't include the Caribbean. In fact, it's a very bad concept because, again, it's from the global north. But if you notice, the global north is scattered throughout the world in these blue areas and so on. And therefore, it's not really useful. Every time you see it, it's Asia without this and Oceania without that, which makes it pretty useless. I think Oceania and the Caribbean could be considered together as small island states, and then the whole of the tropics be considered as pan-tropical when we want to discuss things. And that's basically what they call the low middle income countries. And again, I will posit to you, it's because of the colonization debacle, why that condition is there. But let us look at it from another viewpoint. Let us look at it from the idea of the biodiversity hotspots, which are in red. And again, I have circled the Caribbean and Oceania as being two areas that should be working together, which is why I am very interested in this lecture. I think it talks for itself. So the first thing I did when I started the group was to see what medicinal plants had been identified by UWI already. Since UWI started in 1948 to 2006, we came up with 334 plants. And this just shows how these medicinal plants have been distributed. What I did is look at the flora from different countries and see how closely they were to what was in Jamaica. And you realize that there is quite a lot of overlap, but also that there are endemics in Jamaica that are nowhere else. And this goes to species names, so even varieties might be different. Another group that I've been working with is called TRAMIL, Traditional Medicine of the Islands. And there is one questionnaire that is used as a basis of this. And basically you go to the families and you ask the mother and fathers, and grandfathers and grandparents, what do you do if you have a cold? And if they tell you, oh, I used Leaf Alive, for example, then you ask them, how did they use it? And so you get their recipes. So these surveys in the yellow have been done throughout the Caribbean. You can see here even further away, because it's being interested to other people to use this TRAMIL questionnaire. It allows you to compare between different countries. And then you have diffusion, where you get it back to the community and workshops. And then the scientific work, what we call TRADIF is that, and TRIG is the scientific work, is to take the recipe and test it for efficacy and toxicity, the actual recipe that is used. And then those that are not toxic, efficacious, go into a Caribbean pharmacopoeia. So this is available online. And this is one of the few initiatives that have transcended the different languages and divisions of the Caribbean. As you can see, it's scattered right throughout and available in 3 different languages: English, French, and Spanish. Why is this so important? Because the Caribbean has a very high ethnobotanical usage. So in Montserrat alone, which is one of these little dots that you see there, 256 medicinal, 24 poisonous plants. And then they had a volcano and it erupted. And anyway, that's part of the problem. So we're trying to develop a database of these medicinal plants. So far, just by looking at 34 books available throughout, written by Caribbean people, we have been up to almost heading towards 4,000 medicinal plants. So that is available, but we need help in all of these things. We're just trying to put together the knowledge that we have. So we have some that are only in one country and some that are in many countries. That's an example of an endemic in Jamaica, is Search My Heart, in which then is to get those plants that are identified as being useful into tissue culture, where we can clean them and multiply them and put them back into the wild where needed, or use for industry. Example, guinea hen weed. We have a patent at UWI for this, for an anti-cancer chemical. We were able to show that it was 30-fold in somatic embryos, and there's also a local tonic on the market. One of the issues we have is we still don't know a lot about our plants, right? Some have not been seen, so we don't know them scientifically. So I've seen them, but not the actual to be able to multiply them, which means that they could die out in the wild. That's me with one of them, Cheney root, where we found 2 different types. So I have to go and get them from the wild. And then we grow them in tissue culture. So we go through the different stages: initiation, multiplication, rooting. And this one is sarsaparilla, where we go through the stages and then we plant and get the root and just do our analysis on them. And as I say, take them back to the wild. This is turmeric. You should know this one very well. We have Jamaican adapted, being in Jamaica a long time. This is one that goes through tissue culture. It has these nodules at the bottom. And again, a lot of different products. It has been coming up recently as a revitalized plant. And we are looking at the effect of location, reaping and blanching on many different components, including curcuminoids. So we're looking to see along how far and how we can develop the value chain, but in relation to how the communities want to arrange it. We're not looking at a big company coming in and taking over. We want the community to grow and develop into these different value chains. This is an example of what we want. This is my research student. She did her work with the bottle brush and antibacterial, antifungal agents. And she now is working with the ministry, the government, but she has her own, she extracts her own oils and she has her own business. So you can look online for Delazine Essentials and you'll see all her different products, which is really amazing what she has done. What we found is that there's a overlap between the biodiversity and the traditional hotspots, so that you cannot look at one without the other. I quickly put this in, but I can't spend any time on it. It's just comparing our traditional medicine with Indian and Chinese. So we have a lot of influencers, a lot of different groups that have come into the Caribbean. And you can see the variation between. This still needs to be written up because Caribbean traditional medicine is not very well known. So what are we doing? We're using modern biotechnology, but we are adjusting it to suit the local communities, which tend to be smaller farmers, biodiversity high, and you see it all here. Intensive agriculture, not a lot of land, a lot of plants, and very hilly. So on the right is the area that we are concentrating on, rather than the modern, what you tend to think of as modern biotechnology. So what we have done, we have let the community lead, and there's a community we've been working with for over 30 years, and they came and asked, can you help us to take the knowledge that you have and that we have as elders and get it to the next generation? So that's the academic, the elder farmer. We're working with the local schools. There is an agriculture group called 4-H clubs. And the funding has come from barter. In other words, whatever I have, I put in, like I use my transport to get there. And whatever they have, whether it's banana or whatever, and their time and their effort, they put in. So we have not actually asked for funding as a project because money kind of gets in the way sometimes. And the projects usually tell you what they want you to do. And we want to get to a point where if we do have a project, it's when we know exactly what we want to do. In the meantime, we're taking a more organic approach. We started this at the beginning of this year to concentrate on yam, but we have integrated other crops along the way, depending on what is available. So we've done work with sweet potato. We just started a project with a student, with a farmer, with coffee, which we would not have been able to do if we had not started integrating our effort with the farmers. The farmers donated the yam varieties. They found yam seeds in 3 different yam species, and the seed is really tiny. We were able to sprout the seed, and the farmers sprouted the seed, and we sharing that seed between the 2 of us. Been able to initiate 12 of those varieties into tissue culture, harden them. Right now we have several hardening experiments out in the field, and we are sharing this right now with a WhatsApp, but we intend to do Zoom as well to get that knowledge that we've had and we are developing right now to the farmers. And this is a take-home message that I really want to get across here, that this transfer of knowledge across generations in biodiversity hotspots is an area that has not been considered, I don't think. I do not see it in the calls for projects, but it needs our support, whether it's books, whether it's school material, whether it's information for school gardens, whatever we need to get this information to the next generation so they can continue to work after we have gone. I've done 30 years. I'm looking to retire soon. I want somebody to be able to take on this work going forward. This is part of our problem, but it can be part of the solution. It's not that money not out there, but I don't think there is as much knowledge or could I say communication between those that have the money and those that could do with this kind of support. We need help, not confusion. This was one that was put up when we went to, we were asked to be part of Planet Under Pressure. They realized that the small island development states were not represented. So we did a session, and that was the Caribbean, the Oceania came together. And this was one of the slides that the Asians bought, that, you know, this is part of the problem, but it can be part of the solution. So that is what I have for you today. There is a lot of information that we have, papers that we have presented before that you can go and read on ResearchGate or academia, etc. And I think that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's just wonderful, the work that you're doing and getting the traditional knowledge of the people and having a documentation on it. That's something that's so much needed, and that catering to the community and also advancing it in ways where we are providing a plantation and a nursery site for it to be sourced, so that there is less of wild species or wild varieties of herbs which could be protected. So it's so good that you're doing it in a very productive way. With that note and with that thought, I would like to invite Rohini Matu, who is also doing a lot of work in the same line, and I'm sure she will have a lot of questions and interest also in this matter and in this subject. So I would like to invite Rohini, who would be able to open up the discussions to many things that we ourselves are not aware of. And I would be happy to have another round of 10 minutes or so between Rohini and Sylvia, and also the other Secretariat support staffs. If you have any questions, you could put that forward. After which we will move to the participants, and you could raise your questions to any of the speakers here. Thank you. Up to you, Rohini.
Yeah, thank you, Smriti, and thank you, Dr. Michelle, for this wonderful talk on ethnobiotechnology. And of course, just to add just a few lines to this, we all know that India and China have the largest repertoire of medicinal plants. We have more than, I think, 17,000 plants in the category, which is categorized under medicinal plants. And of course, this is the largest repository of registered plants. And we have a huge diversity of forest products. And these are also used as an alternate source of medicine. They also to local communities and serve as alternate sources of income for them. Definitely, while we do have the modern medicine, we do have the traditional knowledge. Strengthening or creating a bridge between these two would be a necessary mandate for, I guess, most of the countries now, given the fact that most of these medicinal plants sort of face extinction because of climate, because of environmental change, so many pressures, global warming. So a major challenge is to address extinction of these medicinal plants. But I'd also like to add, at least in India, we have a well-known and a fortified system of medicinal plants. Like, for example, the Indian Ayurveda. We have a strengthened medicinal system in the Siddha system of medicine. We also have the Charaka Samhita, which is an ancient written volume on how to use plants for human and animal husbandry for various diseases. So one of my questions to you is how do you think that the world is going to meet how do we meet a rapid demand for these medicinal plants because of growing population, climate change?
Right. So this is slap into the area that I'm working on, because the plants are there, and unfortunately we are cementing too many areas. We are developing areas for people. We have to, first of all, have areas that don't have any people in them to have these plants have a place of wildness. That's first. So that is what's called in situ areas. We also have to have ex situ areas. That's places that are purposely planted. And I think it's best not to have them in one area, because I've seen where these things are kept in one area and then there's a fire and everything's gone, like you have a museum of something and it's gone. It's better to have a diverse system where different farmers in different areas are responsible for different plants to keep them. So if you have 17,000 varieties, you have 17,000 farmers, and each one is responsible for that particular one. And of course, there has to be then some system of remuneration, which is what I'm talking about, the valuing. And then, so that's called, so we have in situ and we have ex situ. And then you have in vitro. And in vitro can do two things. One is to put the plants in and multiply them. And you can use that for one, establishing, and I don't encourage monoculture, establishing polycultural plants growing together. For example, the Tainos would plant the corn, which goes up, the bean that goes up on it, and then cover the ground with pumpkin. So those kind of systems need to be thought of more in the tropics, where we can grow more things, we have more things, and we need to keep the ground covered. So we have to think of, that's why I like the term pan-tropical, where we talk amongst ourselves what worked in the tropics. And so the polycultural systems, but also to put them back into the wild, right? So you seed back the forest with the different plants, and then you can produce what you want in things like hydroponic systems, aquaponics, and so on, vertical farming, those kind of things. And then conservation, in vitro conservation, where you're going even to cryopreservation of the different varieties, where you can keep them for a much longer process. So those are the kind of things, because yes, there's climate change, but to us, climate change is one issue, but there's a lot of other things that are going on. For example, like I said, the expansion of the cities, and that pinges on those wild areas where the plants, you don't want the plants to be hurt. And then again, if you have an area that is just one plant, then you don't have protection of all this wild biodiversity.
Okay. And also, like, for example, most of these medicinal plants, like you mentioned, geography is, of course, important. So they have a very narrow geographical distribution. Like some plants are adapted to only colder climates or higher altitudes.
Right.
So how do you suppose that we increase production of these medicinal plants, given that even their geographic distribution is lowered because there is a rampant destruction of forests? Like,
Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Is to get them into tissue culture, and then to have the ex situ in vitro. I mean, it has to be purposely done, right? It can't just be left up to okay, they'll survive.
But then most of these, when you have tissue culture and pure cultures, and when you introduce some of these in the wild, there is a lot of a reduction in their growth rate. So how does one address the reduced growth rate of these medicinal plants?
Actually, they do tend to grow faster because tissue culture makes them more juvenile. So there will be the plants are able to go into tissue culture. That's a whole different lecture. But the plants are able to go into tissue culture because they can get smaller, right? And so they adjust into tissue culture. Well, they have to adjust back out of tissue culture as well. So it takes a little time, but you haven't changed the genetics. That's the point. So once you haven't changed the genetics, then they can start multiplying again. But yeah, it can't be just tissue culture alone. You have to have these different areas where the plants are protected.
Okay, so one more question. With regard to the slide that you showed on the cultivation of yam, so what are these innovative technologies that you mentioned, which are being perhaps transferred to the youth, the farmers, etc.? So what are these techniques for yam that you're currently using?
Right. The farmer that I'm working with, he uses a different method of planting planting the yam that has a higher organic component to his yam hill. So they're not difficult or out of the world innovations, but they are innovations that increase the yield quite a bit. So those are the things that we're looking for. It's not big things. It's quite small things, but they result in a measurable increase in yield.
Can you give an example of
one such
technique?
No, that's what I was saying. It's a larger component of organic matter in the yam hill. And this was a technique actually that, when I look at the literature, was being used in Africa, but it seems to was lost in the transfer. So the typical method is where you just make a hole, have the soil, put the yam, and then make a hill and put the yam. But here is actually making a hole, putting in organic matter, making back the hill, and then putting on the yam. So sometimes innovation is actually an old one, but you've lost it for some reason, and then you gain it back.
Do you see any prospects for vertical farming when it comes to medicinal plants?
Yes, a lot. In fact, there was one farmer, it's not really vertical, but there's one farmer that is now producing his plants in those plastic pipes hydroponically. It's just amazing what the farmers are doing. They've got the technology, or they've gone on TikTok, or they've gone on YouTube, they've seen it and they've tried it and it works.
I think if there are more questions, we can.
Yes.
Listening to all your conversation and the threat of all how urban space is gonna take more of our reserve forest. Also, the lands we face that even in India and also in Asia, the lands which were claimed not to be residential because of population growth are all turning into residential areas. And we don't have a corridor where even the birds, bees can transfer from one to the other.
Yeah, you need corridors.
That's a challenge. That's a challenge. How do we make sure that we have like reserve lands for agriculture, biodiversity, something that we need to assert to all our leaders that's there. I would request the technical support here to also have Somitri. She also has a question. So if any of you have questions, we're gonna put you back in the panelist so we can have a more interactive session. First question from your name is difficult for me to pronounce. I'm gonna give it a try. It's Twillingshire. Am I right?
I just called her
Yes.
Twee. I'm so I hope she
Twee.
doesn't mind.
That's
You
easy. Okay.
you can call me Lynn, Lyng, Ling.
Okay, Ling.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you,
Yeah.
Lynn. Can you please introduce yourself, Lynn, and then you have your questions for any?
Yes,
for Sylvia?
good morning to Ma'am Sylvia, and good
Thank you.
evening to everyone in India. I'm at present I'm teaching in a college, St. Mary's College, Shillong, Meghalaya, northeastern part of India.
Mhm.
So actually, why I joined this webinar is because I'm very much interested with ethnobotany, in particular medicinal plants.
Mhm.
So when I saw the topic on ethnobiotechnology, it's the first, so to say, it's the first time like I really want to know what is it all about, because I've been teaching my students about ethnobotany, medicinal plants, but I have never taught them about ethnobiotechnology. So I would like to thank Ma'am Sylvia really for broaden up my concept of biotechnology to bring about the medicinal plants into to in culture, and how to help the students, how to bring about the our new generation, the youth especially, because my grandfather also, he's a traditional practitioner, but I'm sorry to say that I don't have any knowledge about what he used, the plants and the products that he used. So I feel like since I'm interested in about the medicinal plants, ma'am, so I want you to just enlighten me about how will I help especially myself and my students to go about this getting the ethnobotanical knowledge or the traditional knowledge, and
Right.
how to bring about these knowledge into the lab, and also to kind of bring awareness to the younger generation about how to tap, because in northeastern part of India, so much is unexplored, so much is not documented about the traditional knowledge.
Yeah.
So I would just need your guidance and your help in this area.
Right. And you see, that's why I put up the slide to compare the Caribbean, India, and the China, because we have a similar heritage across the tropics with the plants. I would suggest, and I would wonder if we can do it, but because it would be wonderful, I would ask back to my crew if it's possible, is to do some Chamil questionnaires, because it's a very simple questionnaire and it asks the household what do they do if they have whatever condition that they have. What that does is it takes you away from those that are selling the herbs, which might give you a story which might not really be right. to those who have actually used it in their household for a particular purpose and found a use for it. Now, of course, that can't cover all diseases, but it covers a lot. And I think it's a good place to start for students. I was teaching at a university called UTech, and their pharmacy students, I would give this questionnaire to, and they would go back to their community and they would ask. And I've had a PhD student that has also done it. Of course, he's done it more scientifically, so there is a science basis to it. So you actually record, like if you want to do it for your area, how many districts there are, and then there's a random choosing of districts and a random choosing of households. And once you do that, Tramil, where it has like, you have to get 20% usage, and then that is the one that goes forward into the database. So I don't think anybody, I don't know if you have a similar system in India or in the Asian countries, but this is a possibility that we could do, is to expand out Tramil across, because it started in Guadeloupe, it started in the French and islands, and then it spread to the whole of the Caribbean. So there's no reason why it should not spread throughout, and then you'll get those kind of answers. And we have found when we go out, there is a generation of information that would have been lost, because what happened, your grandfather made your mother or your dad healthy, right, without them knowing. And then now you are not as healthy because your father wasn't paying attention. You try to ask your grandfather, but the grandfather is either very old or is gone. So we find there's a generation that has lost this information. And by doing these questionnaires, you get back this information, because if it's not with one person, it's with another. So I was saying, one cocoa fill basket. Getting all these little cocoa, we end up with this full basket of information, which then we share to the whole community. So if you're interested, we can go that route. I like to do things. I don't like to talk. I like to, yeah.
Thanks, Sylvia. I think, Lynn, we really need to get at the structure of the questionnaires, and we need to start collecting the cocoa as soon as possible. This traditional knowledge to document them, it's so important. So I think we could do that as a good start, as also an
Yeah.
initiation of these webinars. And
Yes.
I'm sure Sylvia will be more than happy to share the
Yes.
questionnaires
Yes.
that was there. And also very rightly put, Lynn, even I was fascinated when I came across Sylvia about the ethnobiotechnology, because we do in the process of new tradition technology, we tend to, not tradition but the new technology, we tend to forget the traditional practices, etc. So, and also, I think if I'm correct, it was also by Sylvia in the 1991 or 2003 that those ethnobiotechnology was coined, and the word also came into practice. So we have a pioneer with us, and we would look forward to go a long way in cultivating this. That's there. Next, keep your questions there. If you still have questions, you can always stay back and talk. Yeah, just give to the other participants who do have
Yeah,
questions.
thank you.
Welcoming all our colleagues from also South Asia Hub and also from Taipei Hub. Sikopo, good to see you. Please raise your question, Sikopo. She's joining us from Japan, if I'm not wrong. You could raise your
Nice.
question to the speaker.
Thank you very
With your
much. And
permission,
yes,
can I ask a question?
oh, sorry, is it okay for me to proceed?
Yes, Sikopo.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was a really interesting presentation. So I am a science officer for Future Japan Hub, and I'm also an assistant professor at the Global Station for Indigenous Studies and Cultural Diversity at my university, Hokkaido University. And also, I thought nice to mention that my husband is a Yardi. So I have at least a bit of Jamaican understanding in terms
Yeah,
of.
I hear it.
Yeah, so we actually had a very similar question. With my research, I've worked a lot with communities, and one of the things I'm curious about is how did you manage to get them on board in terms of just the aspect that sometimes when we're working with local communities, the aspect of finance or money tends to be quite huge. So I'm assuming that some of them were seeking a bit more of a commercial benefit for their participation. That might not necessarily be found using our more traditional or indigenous methods. And so this comes also to the question of, for example, sustainability. Have they been able to take ownership of it? And that includes the costs that might come in from being able to actually own this and manage it themselves in the future. So that's my first set of questioning. My second question is also just, I might have missed it, but just wondering, has there been any effort to test the local medications or whatnot that have come out? I do recall during COVID, there were some named countries that said they had cures based on, local herbal remedies and whatnot, but I don't recall that any of these were tested. I think there was a lot more of frowning and simply pushing it aside, but I think there might be room or potential to actually see how much we can gain from these kind of things. And finally, if there's time, just wondering about climate change and the impact on this. Yes, so lots of questions, but I hope you'll be able to
Yeah.
help.
Okay, so one, how we got them involved. Well, this particular group that I'm working with most, they found me over 30 years ago and asked for help, having understood what it is. We go out to local events, like agricultural events, and display what we do. And from that, they hear and see and come. Right. So this group has actually come, and other groups I have gone to. So there's a variation. What I try to do when I go into a new area is to find a person that is the most interested and the most innovative, and make a friend. That's the important thing. You make a friend. You answer the immediate need, for example, and they don't need that much. It can be a few dollars. To you is nothing, but to them it's a lot. And you make a friend and you make a relationship and you keep in contact. And from that person, you expand out to the community. I have not been able to do it any other way. And this group that I've been working with the most, is that person is also similar to me. He is the center of that community. He has contacts throughout the whole community, the whole watershed. So he keeps in contact with all his people, and then he keeps in contact with me. So then we can get it out to the community. In terms of stepping it up, if you're taking a more organic approach, they have to take ownership. So whatever you give them. So for example, what I did with the yam, I had done previously with pineapple tissue culture, which is a little easier to harden. And I left it with them to harden, and they planted it out. And some farmers were able to produce a lot. And now the pineapple is scattered all throughout the watershed, so that they are making money from those plants. In terms of going on to value added, that is where most likely we will need some help. But what we want to do is, whenever money gets involved, then you can start getting little rifts. So you have to do it in such a way that a lot of people are benefited, and then you start a ripple effect for the others that have not shown interest. So you always, for the new technology, you always have to find the movers, and then you get it mainstream, and then you get it settled out. So yeah, I've done that kind of training to know how to get technology out. In terms of testing local medication, the medical doctors have their thing going on, okay, and they are good at advertising their drugs. The traditional knowledge people are not as good as at it, but those that know about traditional medicine and know the use of it know who makes it and how to get it. So one of the reasons, and I will not be able to say it, Jamaica did so well under COVID, is that whenever the virus got into the rural areas, the rural people just made their drinks and it went. But trying to get it to the authorities to say, listen, use these drinks, I had a hard time. I was not able to do it. Nobody was able to do it. So what we did was just share it among who wanted it. And that is still an issue as to how do we get this traditional medicine mainstream. We might not be able to do it as a medical product. We may have to have a like a parallel kind of thing. The medical people are very scared of being sued, right? But even even in Jamaica, they did end up giving them a cup of turmeric in hospital because that was established as being helpful. But there was a lot of other things they could have used in a similar way, but they were almost too scared to do it. In terms of climate change and the heat, we are doing quite a lot of working out, like for the plantlets. We have to give them extra shade. We have to make sure we have water catchment, more water catchment areas than before, because you don't know when the rain is coming. You have to be prepared to plant out as soon as you smell the humidity, all kind of different things. But if you have, like I said, a polycultural system rather than a monoculture, then it does help, because even monoculture is just one plant. Anything that happens, the whole thing is wiped out. But with a polyculture, it kind of balances one another, even with the uptake of water from the soil. So I hope that answers a little of your questions. But we could talk for a long time. We need to be connected. You know, you say you're the global center. Well, I'm part of the globe. Global studies.
Yes. Yes, it will be great. I think I got your contact, so I'll be sure to get in touch. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Great, thank you. We will take up another question. Saumitri, if you could just raise your question directly to Sylvia or to Rohini.
Thank you, Michelle, for this wonderful talk. I just had a question following up on what Rohini had earlier raised. The depletion of the land areas for medicinal plants with the rapid urbanization. Now, we do know that tissue culture can replicate the genetic pattern, but growing it out of its natural habitat, do you see its chemical components being the same and its potency the same as you would have in plants that grow in their natural habitat? With polyculture, you have found that there is better resistance to diseases, but does this apply for medicinal plants as well? And with vertical farming, have we been able to see that this consistency in the chemical composition of the plant is maintained? Because we have studies where we've seen coriander grown in very polluted waters has absorbed much more or higher levels of nitrous waste than is permitted in the natural habitat. So this is just a question based on that.
You know, you have about 50 questions in that one question, right? Sorry. I could talk a lot on what you're saying. So yes, we have seen there's something called wildcrafting, where you actually have the forest, and this is like what you call polyculture or permanent culture, where you can get the plants growing and harvesting, but in a more natural environment. When you say growing outside their zone, it tends to suggest to me that it goes into a monoculture. So that is an additional problem to it being outside of its zone. Whenever, like for example, you have a recipe that is called for an infusion. For example, you just think of a cup of tea, right? And you take it straight from the forest or straight from the yard and you make your cup of tea. But if you want to take it further away to somebody else, you have to dry it. And that then requires testing. And that is how we end up with our tea industry being safe, that they've tested, and they have the black tea and so on, different types of tea. So if you're going to take it out of where it normally grows, then it requires testing. If you're going to add some kind of a liquid fertilizer, organic fertilizer, then it requires testing. If you're going to add inorganic, whatever it is that you want to do, you can't assume it's going to be the same as where it was originally. So it's going to require testing. That's basically it. And if you're doing tissue culture, again, if you're going straight to a farm setting as opposed to wildcrafting or permaculture, I would expect there to be differences, but I don't know how significant that would be. There's a lot of area there for research. I do know, for example, like with lemongrass, if you put it under conditions that it's happy in, it produces less bioactives. It has to be put under stress, a little amount of stress, and then it produces more bioactives. So to get medicinal plants growing as an agricultural crop or horticulture or wildcrafting or permaculture still has that place where you can do some research, some analysis before saying, you know, this is fine.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's answered at least some of your questions.
Yes, I would probably have been happier with a longer discussion, but
Yeah,
with time
yeah.
constraints, thank you so much for answering this.
Thank you so much. We have gone 10 minutes beyond our timeline, but then if all the speakers are available, you can still have your questions. And if not, if any of the if there's any other question, or if
There's one in the chat,
okay.
and I
In the
think
chat, in the
how
chat as well. Yeah, I did read that. It was more about how do startups get themselves involved, I think, in a business related to traditional practices.
Right. I would suggest, if anyone is interested in working in community development in this way of linking the knowledge from the scientists to the knowledge of the farmers to take to the next generation, which is, I think, what we've been talking about. How can companies or startups assist in these efforts? I think they can assist by helping in putting together projects that are in line and working with both the ethnobiotechnologist and the elder farmers to design these interventions that are in line with the community ideals and values, because there are lots of things we can do, but there's not a lot of people that are in this area. As you can see, it's a term that is we're just trying to get out now. But there is money out there. And if you design a project accordingly, I think you can get funding, and then you can get that startup. And then that startup could be looking more in the commercial aspect of getting the value-added products, and in such a way that the money comes back to the community, a portion gets back to the community. So yeah, I think they can. And I'll be willing to help, of course.
All
Mapule,
right.
that's my student.
Great, great, great. That's lovely. Also, if there's any other question from the technical support, the staffs here, you feel free to raise a hand here. And many see that they will be emailing you, Michelle, so you'll
I put
receive
my
a lot of
email in.
emails.
Yeah, I put my email
Yeah,
in the chat.
they said there'll be your email will be flooded with questions. That's the
That's
message
fine.
I am getting.
That's fine.
And thank you so much, Michelle, for this I think we had one of the most interactive science awareness series. This is the fourth one. And also I would like to thank Rohini, who was there to raise questions pertaining to so many things that many other students would want to ask because they are on holidays or could not join, which will be shared with everyone. And also I thank each and everyone who've been here. I see 22 participants in total, and proud to say that this series will be broadcasted, and also to thank all the colleagues helping to get this webinar series, especially to Michelle for waking up early morning and
It's
must
okay.
be 6 a.m. there. We also look
5.
forward to 5, yes. Okay.
The sun hasn't,
5
the
there.
sun has just come up.
Yeah, I can see behind you. I can see a moon there behind you in the picture. But yes, lovely. Thank you so much, Michelle, for such a lovely talk. And we do need to conserve or have a documentation on the traditional practices. There is a shout out of thank you from many of the participants here. And with that, we
Yeah.
would like to end the 4th series, and we look forward to the 5th series, which would be on urban communities and also townships. So with that note, thank you everybody, and we will be in touch with you, and we'll share the recordings to all the participants as well. So thank you everybody for your questions, and also thank you everybody here, all the
Thank you for
staffs
the
and Michelle.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Michelle.
much.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
night.
Good
Bye
night.
bye.
Bye.